So I want to fast forwarding now to the early 50s and describe her first encounter with William F. Buckley Jr., one of the most famous conservatives of his time and even still today. So, in the years since the Fountainhead, religion had moved to the forefront of American political discourse. Rand remembered the transition clearly. Until the mid to late 1940s, she, quote, did not take the issue of religion and politics very seriously because there was no such threat. The conservatives did not tie their side to God. There was no serious attempt to proclaim that if you wanted to be conservative or to support capitalism, you had to base your case on faith, end quote. By 1950, all this was changing. As the Cold War closed in, communism became always and everywhere godless, and capitalism became linked to Christianity. William F. Buckley's best-selling debut, God and Man at Yale, famously recast Rand and Hayek's secular individualism versus collectivism as an essentially religious struggle, arguing that it replicated on another level, quote, the duel between Christianity and atheism. 2 years later, in his iconic autobiography Witness, Whittaker Chambers defined communism as, quote, man without God, end quote, a substitute faith that flourished in the absence of traditional religion. Russell Kirk kicked off a vogue for new conservatism with his 1953 book, The Conservative Mind, which asserted the importance of religious traditionalism. Even on the left, intellectuals gravitated towards the neo-orthodox theology of the former socialist Reinhold Niebuhr. In turn, Rand became an ever more devout atheist. At a cocktail party, she met the young Buckley, already a celebrated figure on the right. She was characteristically direct, telling him in her thick Russian accent, "You are too intelligent to believe in God," or as Buckley phrased it, "Gott." Buckley was both amused and offended. He sought the advice of other libertarians, including Isabel Patterson, as he pulled together National Review, the flagship magazine of American conservatism, but Rand became one of his favorite targets. And the feud between Buckley and Rand goes on across decades and is something I return to in the book. So they pretty much didn't hit it off right away, but it didn't really bother Rand. She had other powerful and important admirers, among them most famously Alan Greenspan. So I'm going to read a few passages now that talk about their early stages of their relationship. And so Rand encountered Greenspan first in the mid-50s, and he became part of what was called, tongue-in-cheek, the Collective, which was a group of about 10-odd students who gathered around Rand. And the nucleus of this group was a young couple she met in the early 50s, Nathaniel Brandon and Barbara Brandon. And over time, they drew in some of their friends and relatives and formed the nucleus of this tight group around Rand. And Greenspan was there from the very beginning. So here's the excerpt. Although Rand disliked him at first, Alan Greenspan soon became one of her favorites. For 10 months, he was married to Joan Mitchell, Barbara's closest friend, and through her met Rand a few times. Once their marriage was amicably annulled, the former couple grew closer as friends, and Greenspan began joining Rand's circle on a regular basis. Even Joan's subsequent marriage to Alan Blumenthal, Nathan's cousin, did little to disturb Greenspan or discourage his interest in Rand's group. At early meetings, he was quiet and somber, earning the nickname The Undertaker from Rand. Heavily influenced by logical positivism, Greenspan was unwilling to accept any absolutes. He became legendary for his confession that he might not actually exist. It couldn't be proved. Hearing this, Rand pounced. And by the way, who is making that statement? To Greenspan, it was a deep exchange that shook his relativist beliefs to the core. By many accounts, Rand excelled at the kind of verbal combat that impressed Greenspan. Hiram Hayden, an editor at Bobbs Merrill and later Random House, marveled at Rand's ability to conquer sophisticated New Yorkers in any argument. Quote, "Many are the people who laughed at my description of her dialectical invincibility, only later to try their hands and join me among the corpses on the Randian battlefield." Rand began with the basics, establishing agreement on primary axioms and principles. She came out on top by showing how her opponents' ideas and beliefs contradicted these foundations. This approach was particularly effective on those who prided themselves on logic and consistency, as did Greenspan. He remembered that, quote, talking to Rand was like starting a game of chess thinking I was good, and then suddenly finding myself in checkmate, end quote. Greenspan was hooked. So, what Rand taught Greenspan and the collective were the essentials of her philosophy, which she called objectivism. And she developed this between the writing of her two novels. Now, objectivism is really hard to summarize, but I will briefly point out its sort of major points. Objectivism holds there's a knowable objective reality, hence its name, objectivism. It takes reason as an absolute. It considers selfishness to be a virtue, and it holds that the most moral and practical social system is laissez-faire capitalism. Now, Rand articulated these ideas most famously in her third major novel, the last novel she would write, Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged was first published in 1957, and it was Rand's masterwork. She poured all of her energy and all of her passion into the book. And when it first came out, the reaction was not positive. Here I'm going to read a description of its publication and reception. When The Fountainhead was published, Rand was an obscure author unknown to the literary world. By contrast, legions awaited Atlas Shrugged. Buzz had been building about the book. The Fountainhead's astounding sales, still strong a decade after publication, seemed to guarantee that her next work would be a blockbuster. Rand herself was becoming a mythological figure in New York, a vivid and memorable character rarely seen by those outside the collective. Random House fed the beast with a series of teaser ads, a press conference, and a prominent display window on Madison Avenue. The word was out. A major new novel was on the way. Rand and the collective, too, were breathless with anticipation. Rand told her followers she would face criticism. She steeled herself for attack. The collective did not take her warning seriously. Carried away by the power of Rand's words, they were convinced it would only be a matter of years before objectivism conquered the world. Robert Hesson, a new member of Rand's circle, remembered the feeling. Quote, "We were the wave of the future. Objectivism would sweep everything in its path." Close quote. With such a buildup, Rand and those closest to her were utterly unprepared for the fierce tide of condemnation that greeted the book. Is it a novel? Is it a nightmare? Time magazine asked in a typically snide review. A few right-leaning magazines and newspapers praised Atlas Shrugged, but taken as a whole, the harsh verdict was clear. Rand was shattered. More than anything else, she wanted a defender, an intellectual equal who would trumpet her accomplishment to the world. None appeared. As it turned out, there was not one Atlas Shrugged, but many. Hostile critics focused relentlessly on Rand's treatment of human relationships, her anger, her bitterness. Business owners and capitalists saw instead her celebration of industry, her appreciation for hard work and craftsmanship, her insight into the dynamics of free markets. Students and younger readers thrilled to her heroic characters and were overjoyed to discover the comprehensive and consistent philosophy of objectivism. The aftermath of the book's publication taught Rand that she was truly on her own. Her path to intellectual prominence would not be typical, conventional, or easy. In retrospect, it seems obvious. Rand would do it her way.